Hi everyone, Nicole Hanna here from Nicole Hanna Jewelry and YouTube's Go Art Yourself. Long time no video, I know, but I do have a very casual, semi-quick tutorial to share with you. You can follow along. I did not measure anything when I started. I just cut some lengths of wire and got to work. I estimate that the base wires listed in the materials list at the beginning is about 20 centimeters, and I believe the weaving wire, as an estimation, was 350 centimeters, between 350 and 400 centimeters. I held all the wires parallel to one another and horizontally, as you can see here. Fanned them out on the end a little bit to create a channel to pass my weaving wire through. And I started about an inch left of center. Again, I didn't measure anything. I just got to work and thought, I'll record this while I'm doing it. And that way you guys can try to follow along, cut some random lengths and see what you end up with as well. This is the 6-1 weave. And I will link to another video of mine in the description below that shows all these weaves a little more closely and a little more slowly and walks you through them. And then that way I don't have to narrate here what's going on, since I spent the first minute or two just explaining that this is just a quick little video. As you can see, the ends of the wires are nearly even with one another on either side of the weave. I completed about 20-25 rotations of the weave. Again, I did not count. I did not measure. I just wanted to see what happens. And so I'm sort of curving one end. And I bent the inner base wire nearest the curved end up towards the other end of the 6-1 weave. And now I'm adding three, I think they're about 6 millimeter oval beads, tube hematite beads. You can use round beads, and in hindsight, I probably would have used round beads for this. Or if not round beads, I think I would have woven a little longer on the 6-1 weave. Now I'm attaching the bead base wire. I'm just going to wrap it around the 3 bottom base wires at the beginning of the 6-1 weave, just to anchor it in place. And again, in hindsight, I really ended up needing about 4 or 5 millimeters of space between each of those beads. So if you're going to follow along and do this one for yourself, I do recommend either making a longer weave or using smaller beads in order to create that necessary space in between the beads. And you'll see the shape gets a little wonky later on because I didn't allow for enough space between those beads. Now on the bottom 3 base wires at the end of the 6-1 weave, I'm doing a 3-3 weave. And again, you can see that in my types of weave video that I'll link below. It's basically 3 coils around the second base wire from the bottom, and then 3 coils around both the second and third base wire from the bottom. And I repeat it again, 3 coils around the second base wire and 3 coils around the third base wire. And I repeat that 3.5 times. I want to start and end this weave with the 1 wire coils, with the coils around base wire 2. So I've got 3.5 rotations of that 3-3 weave. And I'm going to curve it in towards the 6-1 weave in a very tight counterclockwise direction. And then I'm going to curve that bottom base wire in a tight counterclockwise direction inside that 3-3 weave. And that way all 3 of those base wires line up nice and parallel to one another. I'm sorry that I'm off frame a little bit here. Guys, I am like really out of practice doing videos. I got to get back into the swing of things, so I figured I'd do something a little on the casual side. Now with these 3 base wires, I'm doing a 2-2 weave. Again, you can find this weave in my types of weave video, and I also have a free PDF file on my website that I'll link below that details these weaves as well. And it's basically 2 coils around the 2 bottom wires and 2 coils around the 2 top wires. Completes 1 rotation of the 2-2 weave. And I'm just repeating the process. 2 coils around the bottom 2 wires. And then 2 coils around the top 2. And I think I ended up with about 10 rotations of this weave. And I'm just trimming the weaving wire, and I'm going to set it aside for use in the next step. And now I want to anchor this weave to that bead base wire just past the first bead added. I'm very gently using my pliers to kind of pinch that tightly closed around the bead base wire. You don't want to pinch too tightly. If you have nylon jaw pliers, I recommend using those. I don't have any. I'm just learned to use a gentle hand. So I trimmed off the excess, and I'm just pinching those base wires closed around that bead base wire. And there is some waste here because I had no plan when I started. But again, in hindsight, I probably would have made that original weave much longer to accommodate for the space that I really needed between those beads. So there wouldn't be quite as much waste in the end that way, but yeah, there is a little bit of waste here. So you can probably get away with 15 centimeters for the base wires. Now on the remaining 2 base wires at the end of that 6-1 weave, I'm doing another 3-3 weave. And I did about, I don't know, 10 rotations of that weave. 10.5. I ended it with the coils around a single wire. And I'm curving it around the 2-2 weave towards the bead base wire. And it looks like I'm going to need another rotation of the weave to reach the bead base wire. So really you can just start with just a few rotations and add as needed, depending on the size and shape of the beads that you're using. And I adjust as I go, get everything in position the way I want it. And now I'm securing that to the bead base wire as well. And I do apologize that the camera's going in and out of focus. I'm using a new phone with this, and it's not working as well as I'd like. So I think I'm probably going to go back to my old phone if I can find it, and I still have it somewhere, and just use that phone to film in the future. Or try to somehow find if I can turn the autofocus off so that it doesn't do that anymore in future videos. But this is just a nice little casual practice video to get me back into the swing of posting here. Now, instead of trimming these wires, you can see that I'm bringing them up. I'm bringing one of them anyway up between the 3-3 weave and the 6-1 weave to the front of the piece, and now I'm just coiling that base wire. I don't know how long I coiled, that it looks estimation about 3 centimeters, but you can start small and just add as needed. And I'm creating a tight little counterclockwise loop and then positioning that coiled base wire along the outside of the 3-3 weave. Pinching that loop a little flat. And pinching it like that too also really stabilizes the little loops and swirls as well. So I'm going to trim off the excess from the other base wire and pinch that closed around the bead base wire. And now I've got to secure this base wire down at the bottom, and I'm just going to add a few more coils to get it where I need it. Trim the weaving wire and set it aside. And I like to use my needle nose pliers to just sort of shimmy in between weaves so that I can make a space to pass the end of the base wire through. So you can see I'm passing it through the loop of the 3-3 weave. Curving it around the back of that 3-3 weave, and then I'm going to trim the excess and pinch it closed. You really want to make sure that you can't feel any of the base wire ends. When you like rub a finger along the back of the piece, you want to make sure you can't feel any of those ends. So you really pinch it and tuck it closed as good as possible. And I'm going to go ahead and trim the excess from the bead base wire as well. I've decided I'm just not going to end up using it in the final design, which I'm just making it up as I go. I'm just deciding what I'm going to use and not use as I go, and sometimes that does result in some waste. And see, you can see now that there's just not enough space between these beads. So I'm running into some issues with the beads kind of sitting cockeyed on the base wire. But it's okay. It's just a casual video, and it still ended up being a nice piece. So I'm going with it. Now with that weaving wire that we set aside, I am doing a 3-3 weave on on base wire 2 and 3 from the right. Although I guess it depends on how you're holding the piece, if you're right-handed or left-handed, but visually here you can see which wires that I'm working on. So I'm going to do 3.5 rotations of this 3-3 weave. You can see that the coils on the single wire are on the bottom of these two base wires. Now I'm going to curve that in a counterclockwise direction to the right of those beads. And then curve the remaining right base wire in a counterclockwise direction until all 3 of those wires are nice and parallel to one another. Now I'm going to do another 2-2 weave like the previous one we did. And I think it ended up being 20-30 rotations. Honestly, I just kept going until I got to where I needed it to be. As you can see, I want it to kind of carry behind the 6-1 weave a little bit and be able to reach that bead base wire right before that very first bead. So I'm wrapping it around the bead base wire. One at a time. It's just easier to maneuver one base wire end at a time, pulling it taut with my pliers to get it into position. I'm going to trim the bottom of these 3, the shortest one, and pinch that closed around the bead base wire as well as possible. And then with the weaving wire still attached, I'm going to do a 3-3 weave on those 2 base wires. So I think I did 10-12 rotations, and again, you can start with a few and then add as needed. So I'm doing another tight counterclockwise loop. As you can see, I'm pulling it close to me so I can really see what I'm doing. So I know it's out of frame a little bit, but hopefully you can get the general idea. So I really wanted that little tiny loop to be towards the side of the bead, not really underneath it. And then I'm going to curve it up towards the bead base wire again. pinching that loop flat a little bit, just trying to position it where I want to. This is just sort of how the process works for me a lot of times when I don't have an idea in mind and I'm just sitting down to play. This is kind of how it evolves. I just position it, see if I like it. Many times I'll just get frustrated and trim wires off entirely, but so far I'm liking where it's going. Add as many rotations as you need to reach that bead base wire again between the first and second beads. And then I'm going to trim the weaving wire now that I know I have enough of the weave on there. Set it aside because we're not done with it yet. And now I'm going to wrap these ends around the bead base wire. It is wanting to fight me a little bit, so this is when I get my pliers and use those to pull on the ends and get it positioned where I want it. And again, really pinch it closed around that bead base wire to secure, and trim the excess off, and then pinch those ends closed. All right, so we've got a few wires left, and here I'm just trying to decide what I'm going to do next with those remaining wires. And while I decide my next step is often when I just keep fiddling with the piece as a whole and repositioning just by a millimeter until I'm absolutely happy with the placement of things. So for now, that looks pretty good. I know I'm already realizing here that I'm going to run into issues with there being no space between those remaining two beads. But I just decided to forge ahead and see what I could do. So I added another 3/3 weave to 2 of those base wires, and I'm curving those in a counterclockwise direction, creating a nice open loop. Certainly not as tight as some of the curves previously in the piece. So I started with about 10 rotations of the weave, and you know, you just add more as you need it. It's always good to just do a few rotations and add as needed versus doing too many and then having to undo or uncoil the weaving wire, which can leave your wire a little kinked. So I try to undershoot as much as possible and add as needed. So I'm adding a couple more just to get it where I want it. And this, I want it in between the 2 remaining beads. Add one more rotation. Trim the weaving wire, set it aside. I'm going to curve it in towards that bead base wire and secure these ends to the bead base wire. Kind of pinch that flat as much as possible and just force some space in between those beads. And here's where you can see the round beads would have come in handy because you can tell that these beads are a little wonky on the bead base wire. They're not perfectly straight with one another, but that's all right. Sorry, this is off camera a little bit. I just wrapped the remaining top base wire once next to that 3/3 loop. Now I think I'm going to add a coil to the same wire and see where I'll go from there. I do like to do all my coils by hand. Honestly, power tools scare me, so I try to avoid using a drill, although I know that that is a very favored technique for creating coils. But for me, I'm just so used to doing it by hand now that it's just easier than pulling out a tool that I don't need. Whenever you're trimming your wires, always just make sure that the ends aren't sticking up and they're nice and flush against those base wires. So I'm curving it around that, along the inside of that 3/3 weave, and get it to that bead base wire, adding coils as I may or may not need them. Kind of pinching it flat so that all those weaves and coils lay nice next to one another. But you do always want to be gentle when you're pinching your work to make sure that the pliers don't mark up the metal. So you can even wrap the piece with a soft, clean cloth and then pinch around the cloth. And that way you can make sure that you're not marking anything up. So I'm just going to add a few more coils just to get it to that bead base wire where I want it. And you can see I'm at the very end of my weaving wire. I believe it was probably probably closer to 350 centimeters in length than it was to 400. But generally, those are the lengths that I tend to cut initially when I'm working on a piece. So I'm going to trim the excess of that wire and discard it. And then securing that wire to the bead base wire as well. And before I trim the ends of things, I do like to make sure that I like the position of things. I don't want to cut something prematurely and then discover after the fact that I want to make an adjustment and there's not enough length available to me to do that. So I'm leaving the ends on while I get that 3/3 weave in that coil positioned where I want it. Now I'm just looking it over and seeing if I'm done, if I want to be done with it, or do a little something else with it. So I'm taking one of the base wire ends, it doesn't really matter which one, and kind of curving it in towards the 6/1 weave. I know that I'm off frame. I do apologize. I'm really rusty. It's been a long time since I've done a video like this. But I promise they will be much more regular now that things have calmed down a little bit for me and I'm not quite as busy this time of year. So I'm just securing that single bare base wire to the bead base wire just after that third final bead. Just pinching, securing, getting everything in place where I want it. Trim the excess off of that, decide where I want to secure it. Here I've decided that I really need to pass it back up to the front to make sure that it's fully secured around the 3/3 weave. So I'm trimming the excess off now, now that I've carried it all the way around, and I know it's not going to move. It's not going anywhere. Just trying to pinch that end closed. Now just playing with placement and movement and seeing if there's anything else that I really want to do. And as you can see, I did end up cutting a little more length of wire, probably another 20 or 30 centimeters, and I'm creating a coil on one of the remaining 2 base wires. And I'm just going to follow the line of that previous base wire up to the top of the 3rd bead. And I really do, if the wires are short or it's in a very tight place where I just can't get my fingers, I do like to utilize my needle nose pliers as much as possible to position things where I want them. And here I'm just fiddling because it's not sitting right. So I'm trimming some of that excess wire end from the bare base wire that we positioned previously, so that I can get this coil to sit where I want it to sit. It's all part of the creative process, right? You just try something, and if you don't like it, you can undo it. Nothing has to be permanent. It can all just be fun and just experimental. So I like what I've got. I like where it's positioned. So I'm going to trim all of the excess wires. I've decided I didn't want to do anything with that remaining wire end. So I'm just going to be sure that those are all pinched tightly and secured. And you've got yourself a finished pendant. Now I'm trying to decide where I'm going to hang the jump ring for the bail. If I'm going to pass it through the 3/3 loop, which initially I did. I put it on the 3/3 loop, as you'll see, but it actually didn't hang centered. It sort of caused the pendant to hang at an angle, which I didn't like. So I ended up moving the jump ring to that coiled base wire that's next to the 3/3 weave, which you can see in the photo at the beginning of the video. So there it is along the 3/3 loop. It's just a piece of 14 gauge round wire that I wrapped around a mandrel, and that's how I create my jump rings, essentially. And so I ended up not liking it there, and as you can see here, I moved it to the coiled base wire. And that is it. I know it's a weird video, and I was kind of all over the place, and I didn't have measurements. Nevertheless, I hope you enjoyed it, and I do intend that future videos will not be quite so ill-prepared. But this was just a quick thing to show you my process and let you come along for the ride if you wanted to. So I will see you again soon, and thanks for watching. Bye.